Jon, welcome to our group today, and tell us a little bit about how you got started and Scroll and so forth.
Sure. Well, yeah, I live in Williamsport. I've been there for 36 years. My wife of 40 years, Rhonda, grew up in Attica, so that's my local tie. I grew up 15 miles from Evansville, down south, and we met at the other Indiana University down in Bloomington. Have 2 grown children. I've been scrolling maybe 10 years, so I don't consider myself a long timer or an expert. But my father-in-law was quite a woodworker. He did some scrolling. That was a minor part of what he did, but he did some scrolling. He made bowls. He had a ringmaster. He did some lathe work. He liked to make candlesticks. He built some cabinets. He did a little bit of everything. I just do scroll sawing. I have a small shop and don't have the room or the time or the know-how to do any of the big projects, but I've really enjoyed scroll sawing. I started out about 10 years ago just playing with his scroll saw, and then I met my mentor, Kurt Wilkins, here on the end. Kurt's got the projects down here. I met Kurt, and he lives outside of Crawfordsville, and I spent some time with Kurt on some Saturdays trying to glean information. And then I just went home and practiced, and you all know whatever type of woodworking you do, you got to be willing to make mistakes and put it in the firewood pile. And then you ask someone with more experience than what did I do wrong? You just have to practice and make mistakes. And so I would visit Kurt every once in a while and take show and tell to him, and he would never critique me. He would just say, "Oh, that looks great, Jon. You're doing a great job." But Kurt's got some great projects here. I'll mention it during my talk. So I bought this saw. We'll talk a little bit. I have the DeWalt, which is one of the most popular saws. It's not necessarily the best saw. One of the things I really like about scroll sawing is that it doesn't take much room. I have a very small shop, and it is relatively inexpensive to get into. I've got a list here I'll mention of what I consider the essential tools that you need, and then the optionals and the accessories. It's interesting, people talk about their workshops, and some folks are doing this in their spare bedroom in their house. They've got their scroll saw, and some of them don't even have a dust collection system. Scroll saws, compared to a lot of saws and lathes, don't make that much dust, but if you have a dust collection system, you could do it in a spare bedroom and shut the door, and you'd have very little or no dust get out of that room. I named my workshop Hermes Workshop. You may not be familiar with an old animated film, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but there's an elf named Hermie, and Hermie wanted to be a dentist. And he ends up pulling the abominable snowman's teeth. But anyway, my son, I started doing stuff in my workshop, and my son said, "Dad, you're Hermie." He said, "You're not the elf that wanted to be a dentist, you're the dentist that wanted to be an elf." I do a little bit of everything. I do some projects that would be considered more of a craft project because I do use some paint. I do projects where there's no paint, it's just a clear finish of some sort, but I do a fair number of things that I paint and you would consider craft projects. So that's about the size of my workshop. I was telling one of the gentlemen, I didn't bring it, but I rarely stand when I'm doing my work. I have a draftsman stool that I got on Amazon. It's got a foot ring there. A lot of people, one of the accessories they have for their saw is a power switch, an on-off accelerator switch. Well, a lot of times I've got my feet on that ring just cutting away, and so I rarely stand. If I'm doing a really big piece, it's hard to see, I might be standing, but otherwise I'm sitting in my stool. Some of these pieces are pretty tedious to sand. You've got to use little needle files and little pieces of sandpaper, so I wheel it over there. That's my workbench behind in the background, I wheel over there and I've got my little needle files and my little pieces of sandpaper, and I just go over there. I've got my radio on, and I sit in my stool. You know, I can't imagine standing there, even with a fatigue mat. It'd kill me. And in this kind of weather, my workshop's under, the garage is under the house. I'll have the garage door up, and nice weather like this, I'll go out on the patio, at the table, and take my little files and sand out there. That's not the fun part, the sanding, but it's an important part of finishing a project. So you don't need much space. Next slide. We're going to kind of walk through some things. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask me. For the must-have, this is just my opinion, obviously the Scrollsaw, and a drill press, I think, is a must-have if you're going to do anything that's very fine, because when you have to drill an entry hole, and this is a small project, you have to drill an entry hole for each of the cuts you're going to make and feed that blade through there. This is stacked. There's two pieces here, so when you get this cut out, you're going to have two projects finished. And some of these entry holes are pretty tiny. I only did the large ones. And if you're using a hand drill and you're not perfectly parallel, you're going to screw up the bottom. You may not screw up the top one, but the bottom one you're going to screw up. So I think a drill press, you can go to Harbor Freight and get a tabletop drill press for almost nothing, and it'd work just fine. So I think you need a drill press, a sander, orbital, and pad sander. An orbital, I think, would even be optional. A pad sander, some of these projects, when you get the projects, this is that same one I just held up, when you get these projects ready to sand, you put an orbital sander on this and it's going to go crazy and you're going to break it. But a pad sander works really good. A compressor, basically so you got some air, you can blow the sawdust out at different phases, mainly when you're getting to the finished stage. And then optional, a table saw. I didn't have a table saw until Christmas. And I got until this past Christmas, I got one. My son got me a table saw, and my wife got me well, it's not even on there, a router, and they're the cheapest ones you can get at Lowe's. But I didn't have a table saw. I would use my father-in-law's. He passed a couple of years ago. I would go over there and use his table saw, but when he passed, his table saw was on the shopsmith. I didn't have room or the desire to keep the shopsmith. Nelson has the shopsmith that was my father-in-law. So I had a couple of patients or carpenters, and they said, anytime you need a table saw, you need something ripped, which isn't very often, just let me know. So I didn't have a table saw until just recently. Some kind of a radial arm saw is handy. I mean, some of my projects, I've got a piece of oak for the base of this, which I bought at Menards, bought a piece of oak and needed a table saw to rip it into strips, and then just so that the cuts are nice, radial arm saw, you could cut those off with your scroll saw. A planer is really handy. Most of you probably have one or have used one, and mine's on wheels. It's on a stand, so I can take it out on the patio. I maybe plane wood twice a year, not very often, and I don't have a dust collector system or the room in my shop to do one inside, but a planer's handy. Next slide. Then accessories. I do have a dust collection system. This is, some people just make homemade ones. I'm thinking about upgrading. This was called a Scronato, and he's gotten rid of this and got an upgraded one, which it's about $60, and it looks like pieces from a CPAP machine and plastic. I mean, but it works pretty well, but this seems to work good for me. Some saws come with a light. I bought mine from Amazon. It has a magnifier. You can look through there. I've never done it. I don't use it, but you could tilt this and look through that. Like I said, I couldn't work for very long without I can handle today to demonstrate, but a chair of some kind. An upgrade, someone asked, these blade clamps are Pegasus blade clamps, and they're theoretically the best blade clamps. They're lighter, the thumb screws tighten easier. An on-off foot switch, which I don't think is necessary. I have one for my vacuum that I usually use, and it's not an accelerator type, but it's an on-off.
Can you get the Pegasus blade clamp for a Delta?
You would have to look online. They make it for a couple different saws. I just know that they advertise that they made them for DeWalt, but they might. I can find out.
No, that's fine. I'll look.
Did you buy it from Bear Woods?
I bought yes, I did buy those from Bear Woods.
Because I'm going to order some this afternoon.
They make little arms, little metal rods that you can attach that holds this up, or you can use a block of wood for a sander. Stall stands, some people make a stand. I just bought the stand and it fits perfectly. I have the back on a 2x4, so it's tilted up just a tiny bit, just easier on the eyes. From not bending over if you want to get on top of it a little bit better. Next. Personal protection, you all know, what you want to do to protect yourself in your shop. Next. So I have some copies if anybody's interested in a scroll saw. I have several copies of this over there. I tried to scan it. It didn't work very good, but this is a quick comparison chart for scroll saws, and this was in Scroller magazine. I've got some magazine. It was in the Woodworking and Crafts magazine. This comes out quarterly, and it's a lot of scroll sawing. Got tons and tons of free patterns, and they have miscellaneous articles. So this is pretty up to date. They've all got different features. This also, the throat size, how big a project you can make is important. This is probably a 20-inch. Some of them go up to 30 inches. I can't imagine doing a 30-inch. I'll talk about how you can do a bigger piece. You can't turn a big piece very easily, but we'll talk about how you can make a pretty good-sized piece because you switch to a spiral blade. But anyway, this gives some of the features. You can I've got the full article if you want to look at it. I didn't scan and copy, but I've got several copies of this if anybody's interested in that. Next slide.
John,
Yep.
on the depth of your throat to your foot, if you use a bigger piece of wood, you can actually turn a flat blade around backwards.
Yeah, Kurt turns the blade, if he's got a bigger piece of wood, he turns the blade around backwards. And yeah, I've never done that, but that's an option. Yeah. Next slide. So selecting a project. If you do Facebook or the internet, not Facebook, if you do the internet at all and you're interested in scroll sawing, are any of you familiar with Steve Good, his scroll saw workshop? A lot of these projects, some of these projects, and I've got pictures of some, are Steve Good patterns. He sends out an email with a pattern every day. Every day you get, and you look at it, and if you like it, you can download it. He has no copyright restrictions. You can do whatever you want with it. But Steve Good, Scroll Saw Workshop. And on the website, he's got a catalog of patterns by category, because there are 2,000 or so patterns. But by category, seasonal, I don't know what all his categories are. You could probably put in Christmas, religious, different categories. And I would say I print maybe, I get a daily pattern. I'll print maybe 2 a month. But then all of a sudden, I like a lot of his Christmas patterns. Maybe I'll do 2 or 3 or 4 in December, November and December, when he's putting Christmas patterns. But anyway, it's a great way to get, and some of them are very, very simple patterns. A lot of them are simple. He doesn't have any that are super, super technical, like you see down here on the end that Kurt's done. Those are considered advanced patterns. He's got blogs and videos, technique videos on there, reviews. He reviewed this dust collection system. This is an old one, you can't even get anymore. But he's got lots of information on there. Everything is free. He does have a place if you want to donate. I mean, it's a hobby for him. I think he's retired now. He does accept donations. He does sell a few things that he cuts and makes, but you can make a donation to him. Copyrights, Kurt and I have talked about this a little bit. You have to be careful. I guess I'm not completely super careful if I'm making something to give to my kids, but if you're going to sell something, you know, go to a craft show or sell stuff, you got to be really careful about the copyright. Some of them, the patterns that you buy, they're still like, it's the honor system. They say you can make 5 projects with this pattern, which, you know, they don't know that. It's an honor system. But anyway, you have to be really careful if you are selling your things. Be very mindful of copyrights. Next slide. Okay, so these are Steve Good patterns here. That's a really small bowl and basket. And Steve made that with 1/4-inch Baltic birch plywood. Well, I used cherry and maple. And I had the scrap. Now, it did take several pieces. You know, I had to have pieces of cherry about this big. And you're just cutting a ring out of it to stack the sides. But the inside of that was big enough. That's 1/4-inch thick that, you know, it didn't go into the burn pile. It went into the future use pile. If I was making, I've pulled out a little piece of the scrap from that and cut something out of cherry. Next slide. This is made out of Baltic birch plywood. When he posted that online, he didn't have it painted. I just did that for fun. My wife likes snowmen and stuff like that, so I made that for her for Christmas, and I painted it. So that's something, it's made with Scrollsaw, but a lot of people would consider that more of a craft project, not a woodworking project. Next slide. I made these last spring, and again, Steve's patterns that's made out of Baltic birch plywood. I don't know how they're going to hold up. I told my kids when I gave them to them to maybe in the winter bring them in, and when you set them outside, if you could put it under the eave of the house so they don't get as much weather. I sprayed them with some kind of spar varnish or something, but Steve's were just plain, but I tailored mine a little bit. I have a daughter that went to Purdue. I have a son, he went to Wabash, he went to IU School of Law, and he's a big IU fan. Well, actually the IU one is my wife and I's. The Cubs one is for my son. And then the one that I nicknamed him Confused because he's got the Purdue hat and the IU shirt on. Dear friends of ours that we spend a lot of time with, they're a mixed marriage. And so I gave that one to them. Next slide. I just did this one in the fall. Again, a Steve Good, you know, that's a picket fence from Lowe's that you could get 2 patterns out of. You know, I spent a couple bucks for it, and then that's just Baltic birch plywood, 1/4-inch, and after I painted it, then I sprayed the heck out of it. It's designed maybe to go on your front porch. Ours we put inside the front door in a little spot in the entryway. Next. I've got that one up here, segmentation. I'm not going to get into intarsia. Those of you that are scroll sawers know about intarsia. I think that would be something I'd be interested in getting into someday, but not while I'm still working full time. But that segmentation, you basically are just cutting it out, and then I used a little handheld Dremel tool with the sandpaper and just hand sanded. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's a little tricky. I've only done 2 of these, but Steve Good had a pattern for a snowman, I'm going to make, that's just like this, but it's a snowman. I'm going to make that for my wife for next. This one I really like. I made my kids this and gave it to them for Easter, resurrection scene. And so I've used a half a dozen kinds of hardwood, half-inch hardwood. Yeah, that was fun. Yellow heart, and I've got cedar and cherry and walnut, a duke, sassafras. So that's fun. Just use, when I make a project, just like this one right here, this is, I've probably made 50 of these. I give them away. On the bottom, at the suggestion of my sister-in-law, she said, well, what kind of woods are those? Because I said they're made out of 5 or 6 kinds of hardwood, so I've got a tag on there that tells what kind of hardwoods, half-inch. So it's kind of fun. Next. So Steve Good's a great source for patterns. These are just some other pattern sources. The magazine that I mentioned, Scrollsaw Woodworking and Crafts, that used to come out when I first started getting it every other month, but now it's quarterly, which is probably plenty. They sell a lot of books and catalogs within the magazine. They have free patterns, but then this project right here is something called word art. It's a scripture, and I found a guy who had a little catalog in the magazine that he sold. He was a pastor, and he was a woodworker, and he had it's not a real big catalog, but it had probably 40 or 50 projects that he did that were all word art. And so that was kind of fun. And then he had ideas for how he framed them. That's Hobby Lobby pre-made mat and frame, so I don't have a lot of money invested in that. Bare Woods, you can go online, or I don't have their catalog. They have the catalog. They've got wood, they've got blades, they've got patterns, they've got a little bit of everything. There are lots of online sources. Sometimes I design my own, and clip art. You can look up clip art. I did my daughter's a veterinarian, and I have the Lord God made them all on a big piece of wood with live edge, bought from Kurt, the wood. And I've got all these critters. So I've got cows, horses, all the different critters that she has worked on, cats, dogs, and they're all patterned. I designed them all from clip art, and then kind of made a pattern out of it, so you can do that. Sue May, have any of you guys that scroll heard of Sue May? She's actually in South Africa, so it's all online. And my Noah's Ark, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is a Sue May pattern. I'm saving this. My daughter's not married, but she said if she ever gets married and has a kid, she wants this. So anyway, I think that's a Sue May. So if you order hers and you pay through credit card, if your wife, my wife said, did you buy something from South Africa? Because it came through on the credit card. It's $5 or $6 for the pattern, and but you get, it's emailed to you and you download it. So Sue May, she's got a lot of good patterns. She has a few free patterns on her website that are pretty cool. Create your own, I do that, or modify. Steve Good, I don't think I have a picture, but he had I modify some of his. I kind of lean toward a lot of religious patterns, and he had one of words in the shape of a Christmas tree from like joy, Jesus, and it was shaped in a Christmas tree. And I used some of his words, and I changed some of the words because, again, there's no copyright restrictions with Steve Good patterns. And so I modified it, and I kind of enjoy that. And I get out my paper, and I've got stencils of different letter sizes and fonts and things, and I make my own patterns sometimes, or modify patterns. Compound patterns. I'm not going to really get into that. Are you guys familiar with compound cutting? Kurt brought some examples. He's got some really cool little animals that he's compound cut. You just use like a 1.5 by 1.5 or 2 by 2 inch piece of wood about yay long, and you glue the pattern on an edge, and you have to have a little jig. It's a whole different world. I don't do a lot of it. Kurt can talk to you about compound patterns and cutting. He's really good at it. Next. These are just some miscellaneous projects. This is one, I don't know how the copyright thing, I don't think it would be copyrighted. I went to a craft show down at Plainfield. I actually bought this nativity set that I love. It was a big one. It was like 4 times that size, so it took tons of hardwood, so I reduced it and made my own pattern. But the same guy, another year I was down there, and he had a little project that looked something like this. Now, he didn't use live edge for it, and he didn't use, that's got like 8 different kinds of hardwood. But I just looked at it. You know, I didn't get my camera out, take a picture. You know, that's not cool to take a picture of somebody's project. I just put it up here, and as soon as my wife was driving, as soon as we got out in the van, I just started sketching what I saw, and then I went home and I made my own patterns. I already had some of the patterns for the nativity figures, and I created the other ones. Next slide. And that project, I made one of those, and I didn't know what that nativity scene, and you know, my wife has enough of my project. She doesn't want more, and I love nativity scenes. I've made at least 6 or 8 different types of nativity scenes, and I don't think you can make too many or see too many, but that one, my hometown has a historical museum, or they have a county museum open like 1 day a week, but my cousin and my brother are real involved, and they have a fundraiser, and I sent that one down there, and at their annual fundraiser where they do all these auctions of all these different things, I gave them that and they auctioned it off. So I do that with some of my big projects. This is one that's, this project lights up. It's not very big, it's about yay big. Sits on a table, and it's got a switch in the back, and it'll light up. And this was sitting on the table at our church this winter, and so I took a picture of it, and I'm designing my own pattern from that picture, and it was out for a couple more weeks, so I'd pick it up and look at it. People probably wondered what I was doing, and getting it in my mind. So far it's 3 layers. I have those all cut and painted. Then I've got to cut the box, cut some pieces to make a little box in the front. I got to get some plexiglass, got to get a little light. I'm going to go to Hobby Lobby sometime. And I started on it this winter and I didn't get it done, so it's put away probably till next winter. So that's the one I'm just kind of designing myself. Next. This was from the same guy that did the other nativity scenes. That one's pretty small. It doesn't look small, but that one's pretty small. But it was fun. It's made out of 1/4 inch hardwoods, a whole bunch of different hardwoods. I made that for my kids. I popped all those off and traced the patterns, and then glued them back on and made it for my kids. Next. That was, I think, in the Scrollsaw magazine. They had like every letter in the alphabet in there, and so that's a real fun. That's made out of 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood, real quick and easy. It's got a little piece of, I went to Hobby Lobby and got a little piece of construction paper, but one that's shiny and blue, and that makes it real fun. I made that for my staff members. For Christmas, I always make my staff members a project of some kind, and I made that for a whole bunch of people just with their last initial. One of them went to Ukraine. I've done a lot of mission trips in Ukraine, and I took one to a little girl over there with her first initial. So that's a real fun little project. Next. This one, I can't remember whose pattern this was. I just made this one last fall. It's a Noah's Ark puzzle. And then they use, I just experimented. I went to Hobby Lobby and got some kind of stain paint things, because you don't want super thick paint, but I just experimented, and then I labeled what the animal was on the back. That went to the Netherlands as a gift to my Ukrainian friend. She and her 2 children fled, and they're living in the Netherlands, and we sent a big box of Christmas gifts. And so she has a 6-year-old daughter, 7 now, and so that was for her. And Mom was one of our interpreters, so I took a picture of, or made a photocopy of the original pattern so that they would know how it went back together. So anyway, that was a fun project. A little trickier. I've not done. Do you guys do puzzles? I've never done puzzles. I mean, I know how that puzzle, but anyway, it was fun. If you like to make puzzles, there are whole catalogs of puzzles, and that one caught my eye. I don't know how I saw that, but I love Noah's Ark patterns too. I have another Noah's Ark pattern that I ordered this winter, and it'll probably be next winter's project, because I love Noah's Ark projects too. So a couple of things that I'm going to talk through how I actually made them. 2 projects, and if you want, either during our group or afterwards, I can demonstrate how I cut them. So I've got I call it the Nativity Moon, which this one is ready to cut. I don't have all the entry holes, but this is made out of 1/8 inch Baltic birch plywood, and people love this one. It took me about an hour and 15 minutes to cut that out, and the finishing of it, there's not a whole lot, but you can use the little pieces of sandpaper. Now on this one, I found for Baltic, I don't know about you guys, but Baltic birch plywood, the surface is pretty soft, so if you go at it, you know, I don't hardly ever use 100 or 150 grit paper anymore, just 220, and it gets it does fine. But once you get these cut out, you need to sand both sides. We're going to talk about that, and I've got a little hint for you on that. And then this eagle, this pattern is Kurt's pattern. Kurt's made a number of these, and this one is actually, I've made 2 or 3 of these, and the other ones were gifts. One to my father-in-law, who just loved it when he saw it. I made him one, because the one that I made originally was spoken for, and he's passed, so my son has it, so that's cool. This one is, right after this program, I stopped at this point so I could demonstrate that this is a perfect. This pattern is made 100% with a spiral blade. I cannot imagine cutting this with a straight blade. I suppose you could, but this is a spiral blade. And you break, I've used probably 15 blades, they break. But anyway, this one I'm going to, as soon as we're done here over the next couple of weeks, I got to get this done, because early May, we're going to a benefit dinner for a group that we support up in Fort Wayne, and I'm going to donate it to them for a silent auction or something, and I'll probably tell them the minimum bid is $200, because they're getting a tax-deductible donation, so if they don't want to pay $200, I'll give them $200, the organization, and I'll keep it, and I'll do something else with it. But this is going to be really cool. Lafayette Glass doesn't always have it, but they have something called bronze mirror, and that's what I'm going to put on the backer for this. I've made these before, like this deer scene over here, nature scene. That's just got black poster board and then a piece of wood behind that. But this is going to have a bronze mirror. They're really cool, and I paid $40 for that. But you know, because I had to have them cut it. It had to be, I didn't bring it with me, but it had to fit but it looks really cool. But we're going to talk about this. So the thickness of your wood, my sweet spot, I use a fair amount of Baltic birch plywood, 1/4 and 1/8 inch. If I'm making, this is 5/8. That's kind of my sweet spot for something this big. If you get too thin, it's not going to hold up. I've got a project here started, and then some others. This is 1/2 inch. I use a ton of 1/2 inch thickness. You know, it's not that big of a pattern. It's not going to warp or anything. So 1/2 inch. This is cherry. So those are kind of my sweet spots. Kurt's, are yours 1/8 or 1/4?
There is 2 1/4s in there, the rest of them is 1/8.
Yeah, 1/8 and 1/4. So for the fine fretboard, if you look in the Scrollsaw pattern catalogs, you got to turn to the back to the advanced patterns to see what Kurt's doing over here. So,
John,
yep.
can you talk a second about your patterns and so forth? You print those on a special paper? How do you glue them onto the wood, some of that kind of stuff?
We'll talk about
Okay.
the gluing, but for the patterns, no, I'm fortunate that some of the patterns I either shrink or enlarge, and because I still have a dental office, my copy machine is not fancy, but it will do that. And, you know, so that comes in really handy to have the capability. Now, you'd go to a print shop and they could do that for you, but just regular, the key thing is to always keep a copy, you know, or use your copy. We're going to talk about the process of gluing it. Sources of wood. You guys are woodworkers, so you have lots of sources of wood. Number one is the best way to inherit some. My father-in-law had a whole workshop full of wood, and I pretty much just kept a lot of cherry. I kept a little. He did ringmaster bowls, so he had a lot of blanks that were about this big, and I got some really nice, it's all 3/4 inch, so I'll plane it down. I got some really nice sassafras, which interestingly, that sassafras is just brown. I mean, it's not got any of that coloration in it, but I got a bunch of wood from his shop, and Dave got some wood, bought some wood for turning. He had some 2x2 and 4x4 stuff. If you can't inherit a bunch of wood, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Okouch hardwoods out of Wisconsin. You scrollers, that's a really good source. And I've got this, I don't want you to take this, but you can look at this. But they have what they call scroll-ready wood. And when you get it, it doesn't have many, if any, knots in it. And it's pretty smooth. I mean, you could start maybe with 150 grit, and you don't have to do a whole lot to it. But they call it project-ready hardwoods, and they've got everything from ash, alder, butternut, babinga, red cedar, wind, zebrawood. I mean, they've got it. They've got it all, and you can get it 1/16, 1/8, 3/8, 1/2, 3/4, 4, 6, 8 inches wide. You know, you pay for it, but they send it in 2-foot pieces from Wisconsin, and that's where I've gotten almost all of my 1/4 and 1/8 and 1/2 inch wood that is some kind of a specialty wood. I've got it from them. They're great. Baltic birch, they sell that as well. You can get that a lot of places. And I actually, in the Scrollsaw group that I'm part of, and I don't think I brought the list with me, but they listed in central Indiana where you could buy some of this kind of wood from sawmills, and a lot of times it's considered scrap. And so if they don't give it to you, it's really inexpensive. You can buy that stuff if you go to Rockler's over in Indianapolis and pay premium price. Menards has a pretty decent, they don't have tons of different types, but if you just want oak, they've got a lot of oak, and they've got poplar and a couple other things. They don't have a ton. This is next. Blade selection. A lot of that is just trial and error and personal preference. You guys know that have been scrolling. I have some papers up here that, this one says it's the never fail blade chart, okay? It tells you the material that you're cutting, hardwood, softwood, plywood, the thickness of your wood, and then the blade size that they recommend. Kurt's been scrolling for years, and he's starting to use he's going from Olson to Flying Dutchman. So I just, on my, Olson is a very popular one, Flying Dutchman is as well. I just, on this forum that I joined, Facebook forum, again, I've posted a couple pictures of my projects, but I haven't asked any questions or anything, but they talked about Pegas modified geometry blades. Have you guys used those? I have some here. So I ordered from Bear Woods, I ordered some different ones. Basically, the thicker your wood or the harder your wood, the bigger blade. There's sometimes there's a fine line between being able to make your cuts. This isn't super fine. I think I used a number 5 on this, and I used the modified geometry Pegas blade. Those things are awesome. I love it. I'm going to be probably switching over. I've got a lot of blades. I hate to not use them, so I'll use up my old blades. But that thing, the modified geometry blade, and I've got some up here you can look at. The tooth arrangement, I'm really not much of an expert on the tooth arrangement, but there are so many ones: double tooth, skip tooth, reverse tooth, spiral blades, modified geometry. That's new to me, but I love them. There's all kinds of blades. I guess I use some skip tooth blades. I think one of my handouts might talk about that, or you could get online and read about those. Next. You just got to experiment and see what you like. Got the blade chart that you can look at. The tension, you know if you've scrolled, they say you got to get it tight, and they say that when you do this strumming, it should be a high C or something. Okay, whatever that is. I just get it tight. If you get it too tight, it's going to pop out of your holder. It's going to break. I kind of consider that just a trial and error. For speed, again, that's just kind of, if you have a variable speed, that's kind of personal preference. I tend to, on most of them, on this one, on this big Eagle, I'm running full speed. I don't dial it down to half speed very often, but I run it pretty fast. But sometimes I'll dial it down. Sometimes you're scrolling along and you're burning the wood, and that means it's time to switch. Don't be a miser. Switch your blade out if you're burning the wood, because if you're going to go back in there and sand that, it is really, really hard to get the dark out of there if you've burned your wood. You want to make sure your table, if you have a tilting table, that it's square by using, tighten up your blade and use a little miniature square and make sure you're square. That makes a big difference if you're cutting, like you said, puzzles or certain things, if your blade's not square. Next.
Hey, John, what makes the tear out in the back? I've been getting tear out. Is that
That's
time
normal.
to change the blade?
Not necessarily. Some of the blades are called, and I think some of mine are that way, they're called, the last word is reverse.
I'm using a reverse.
Yeah, and so the bottom few teeth are reverse, so they help prevent the tear out because they'll cut the opposite direction, and they don't cut it down, they'll cut it up and prevent the tear out. We're going to talk, do you tape the back?
I put tape on the front because that's where I put my glue.
Yeah, okay. If you tape the back, that helps to tear out too, and then more lubrication. We're going to talk about that. Yeah, I use everything from a number 1 to a number 5 spiral for this eagle, the nativity moon. I use a number 2 skip double tooth blade because I had them. You know, could have used any number 2 blade. I've got number 2 doubles. Skip tooth's a little more aggressive. This project, I really enjoy this project, and this came out of probably a 10 or 15-year-old Scrollsaw workshop, or the scrolling magazine. I wasn't even a scroller back then. Kurt has all the back issues, so before he went to Florida one winter, he gave me a stack of catalogs. He wanted them back, but I went through them that winter. I went through all of them and just flipped through every one of those and photocopied the patterns that I liked, and this was in there. You know, this was an old pattern. And it's the meaning, it's the Last Supper in crosses. And it's got the meaning of the different crosses. It represents the disciples. But so this I cut out probably with a number 2 or maybe a number 3 because it's stack cut. So you get 2 projects out of one. But you can use, you're going to kind of find your wheelhouse on your favorite blades. You can use a little bit of everything. Next. So preparing the wood, again, I plane down my wood if it's 3/4. I can't remember ever cutting 3/4 inch wood with a scroll project. I mean, you could. It depends on if you're building something, but if it's just a piece of wall art, 5/8, like I said, is my sweet spot, or 1/2 inch. Sand it, 220, 320. It's kind of up to you. These projects, the front of those is kind of like glass. I mean, it's got a spray polyurethane finish on it, so that's how smooth it's going to be. But that's kind of personal preference. The Baltic birch, you got to be careful. One of the things I do, I'm not sure if I have it covered later, but like on this little guy, you got to sand the front and the back. That's where sanding the back takes some of the fuzzies off. And I just use, when I got this popped out, I just used 220, and this is a piece of, this came from under hardwood floor or laminate flooring. This is the little pad. But if you put that project on some kind of a little pad like this, it kind of cushions it, and it makes it less likely if you catch something. It's really nice to keep it from sliding around and keep it from breaking. For live edge projects, again, this is a tip. I've got a couple pages of tips from Kurt that I learned 10 years ago. So for a live edge project, if you look at this up closer, you'll see some shiny spots in the cracks. Before I sanded this, before I did anything to this piece of wood, you don't get carried away, but you want to kind of wiggle around and look for loose pieces of bark. And you don't want to lose any of them. Occasionally, you're going to have to sacrifice a piece, but Loctite super glue, liquid, and just dribble it in there. And don't worry that it's shiny. It's very shiny because my finish is gloss on that project, so it's going to blend in. But you let that set overnight, and then you're good to go. You're not going to lose those pieces. So always do that before you start a live edge. Next. Then applying the pattern. Again, make a copy. I use, you need a spray adhesive of some kind. I use the 3M 45 strength. Again, Kurt suggested that. The higher the number, and there are other Loctite makes them, the higher the number, yeah, they're going to be stickier, but depending on how you treat your wood, it's going to be that much harder to get the residue off. Most of the time, I just do it directly on the wood, okay? I just do it directly on the wood. You can use the blue painter's tape on the front, and I always put some on the back. That lubricates your blade and also helps with the splintering, the tear out. but you can put blue painter's tape and then glue your pattern to that, and then you're just peeling off the blue painter's tape.
After you spray it, do you let it dry for a minute before putting it out, or you just go ahead?
Both. I mean, if I've got 2 or 3 projects, I slip on a glove. I have a box of gloves from my dental office. Put that on. I use spray paint with my right hand, and I hold the pattern with my left hand, and that spray adhesive is nasty on your fingers. So by the time I spray, if I'm doing a couple, spray them and lay them down carefully, flush out my spray can, take my glove off, throw it away. They're ready to put on there. You can use clear packing tape to cover the wood and then put your pattern on that, and then you peel it off. I've got a knife that's got a perfect size blade. Again, I sit down on my chair, flip my pattern over, and I use my knife to catch the edges and peel all the blue tape off. You can use adhesive shelf paper, and people talk about this. I've never done it, but they go to Walmart or different places, and they even know their brand name of shelf paper that they use. Put that on the project, on the wood, and then it just peels off. I've never done that. I always put painter's tape on the back. Again, it helps with the tear out, and it lubricates. Drill the entry holes. Again, like the drill press, I think you've got to have like this one right here. If you didn't have a drill press, some of these, now I just used, I didn't use a real small drill bit for some of these, but some of them, you're going to have to use a really fine drill bit. And inside the halo here for Mary and Joseph, if you're not exactly straight, you're going to get by with it on the top one, but this is a stacked cut. A lot of guys that do this for money, they stack 3 and 4 pieces. I only stack 2. I don't do 3 or 4, but you got to have a parallel entry hole.
On that spray adhesive,
Yep.
I mean, there's several things in scroll sawing that a person will find frustrating, but that's my biggest frustration. And where I've had the worst experiences is, I don't know if I don't get enough glue, I don't press it down good enough, but you're cutting through that framework stuff and the darn pattern comes loose.
Yeah, I've had patterns before where like this pattern is made on 2 pieces of copy paper, okay? And then it's taped together here. But one time I did one and I taped it together on the back, and I glued it on there. Well, that spray adhesive didn't adhere to the Scotch tape very good, and so anytime I got in the middle, it was doing that. It was flipping up. So this is taped on the front, but I think it's probably just that it's not thick enough or it's not even enough. Remove the tape. You know, it's mineral spirits with I've got a little bitty paintbrush. I'll paint on there. That you do need to let that set for a couple minutes, or give it a second coat. I usually give it a second coat. Pull it off. It's going to leave a little residue. I've got an old rag, and I'll wipe the residue off, or use a little mineral spirits on the rag and wipe it off. Got to let it set. If you do the techniques where you put the painter's tape or something else on there and then your pattern, if you can just go to town. I'm usually not in that big of a hurry because I've got 2 or 3 things going at the same time, or I've got something else to do, so I'll just come back the next day and work on it. Sand the front and the back. The tear out on the back is really helped once you go through there and sand that. You do sometimes have to be careful with the fine ones, but that helps with your tear out. And then the tedious part, you can get these little needle files. All these catalogs sell them, and they come in different grids, and it'll come in a package of like a half a dozen. That's where I sit in my chair and listen to the music or the Cubs game or something, and go outside. And I rarely, like on this one, it'll take me 2 or 3 sessions to do that. I'm not going to sit down and sand for a couple hours on that. But the compressor, this is the first place it comes in handy to blow out your saw when you're done. will leave some sawdust in these fine cuts, especially a spiral blade. They make a lot of dust in there. Wipe on poly, I just use the Minwax brand. I think I use satin. That's not the final coat, so it doesn't matter, but it comes in like a quart. And I've got some people dip projects. I will put wax paper or aluminum foil on my workbench, put my project on a couple of shims so it's not laying flat, and I start on the back, use my little brush, dip it in some wipe-on poly, and liberally, I don't just go like this. I want that wipe-on poly, it takes a lot of it, it makes a mess. I want that wipe-on poly to coat every surface I want coated, and do it from this side, and then flip it over and do it from this side. And then you got to do the flat areas, and then you let it set 15 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour, and then take it to your compressor. This also makes a lot of mess, and blow it out. Blow it out of all those, and then blow it out from the other side. And then you're going to find the other side's got all these runs, so you need rags, and gently just wipe it with a rag, and then again put it up on a block. Sometimes I hang my patterns. I've got some hooks I made, and I sometimes hang them, the small stuff. This one I'll put on, I don't have a lot of workbench space, so all that big mess, I got to set this aside and wad up all that and put down fresh wax paper and clean shim so this isn't flat, and put it on there and let it dry. The first coat, you can probably just let it dry overnight. For a really nicely finished project, Kurt taught me to give it do that again. It's time consuming, but do it again. And the second coat, you don't have to be as particular of getting it in every little crack if you were particular the first time. And then after I do that, then I let it dry for 2, 3, 4 days. I let it dry, and if it's hot and humid or chilly in a workshop, I might let it dry for a week. And then I just use, I usually use gloss, just the Minwax spray poly for projects like that. Different projects are finished different ways, but I'll spray. And that, you're going to do multiple coats, very light coats. Yeah, I've made it run before, and I kick myself for being too aggressive with the spray. And then after that, I let that dry for a few days, and next. And then for a backer, you know, if you're framing them, it's going to be a little different, but there's some black poster board. They make acrylic backers that you can buy colored acrylics or mirrors or anything. This one just has black poster board that I bought at the grocery store in Williamsport. And then this is like 1/8 inch, something cheap. I don't even know where it came. It's a piece of scrap. It doesn't matter. But it's screwed on there. Got to make sure you don't get carried away with the size of screws. I think it's your bumpers, your hanger. I think it's important to sign your work and date it. Okay, I've talked to people before. Nah, I don't have a mark. It's kind of hard to see here, but mine has Hermes Workshop. It's a wood burning stamp, handcrafted by Jon Inman, which I think came from Rockler. I think it was mail ordered. It looks like a branding iron. I also have on a couple of projects, I think I have a roll of address labels that are gold, and let's see if I have that. No, that one's got a stamp. I thought I had one. Yeah, that's got my address label, Hermes Workshop, that I ordered a roll of 250. That'll last me a long time. But our daughter, when my in-laws passed, there was a jewelry box, and I was like 95% sure that my father-in-law made it. but he didn't have a signature or anything on it, and my daughter wanted it, and she was going to keep it whether he made it or not. It was cute, and she liked it. When I was going through his workshop and I was going through his patterns, I found the plans for it. So that was cool. I said, Christine, Grandpa, make sure. Next. The Nativity Moon, remove that. You don't have to get very aggressive with Baltic birch plywood to start getting it smooth. You'll find that just pulling the painter's tape off is going to mar the finish on the Baltic birch plywood. It's not very strong, but it's real easy. Blow it off. For the for finishing something like this, you can use the same technique with your wipe-on poly and then spraying it. But something that I experimented with, I like Hobby Lobby for a lot of things since I do what I call crafty stuff. This is spray glitter, and it's called Stardust, I think. And so it's got, you can look at it closer, but it's got a sparkly appearance. And they also make a sealer for it, so it doesn't come off so easy. So, and I just put my name and date on the back. I didn't have room for Hermes Workshop. But I showed my wife, like the sparkling one, and then the one that was just the plain Baltic birch plywood's not that attractive, I don't think. And she's like, oh, I'd like the glittery one. Well, that makes it, that hides some of your imperfections. You don't have to sand. I mean, I was like, cool. And I've given these as a gift. People love these. Like I said, you don't have a ton of time, but people love these. Next. These are just some of the things. I have 2 pages of notes in my early days of visiting Kurt, and we'd go out to his workshop and talk scroll sawing. Trouble spots. If you get into fine fretwork, and I didn't bring a picture of it, but I have an eagle. He's really nice. He's about this tall, bald eagle. Was the pattern in the magazine, and it's got some pretty fine fretwork, but there's a difference between what Kurt's doing over here, fine fretwork, and doing like my eagle or some of these, because I'm using 5/8 inch thick hardwood. So, but still there are trouble spots, and you learn this the hard way, that something is likely to break or it's just a pain in the neck and you don't want to deal with it. So you take your little red pen and you look for these trouble spots and you change the pattern in that trouble spot just a little bit, or you eliminate it. I had my big eagle project, and I hadn't been scrolling but a couple of years, and it was a pretty ambitious one to tackle, although it's 5/8 inch wood, so it was just driving me crazy. It was a winter project, and I put it away and worked on some other things, and then I went back to it about 6 weeks later and got my red pen out. I remembered Kurt's, and I started eliminating some things, like, okay, what's the advantage of having that little entry hole? I mean, some of these projects have 200-300 entry holes that you got to drill, so that's how many times you got to thread your saw blade through there. So I started, I eliminated maybe 10 or 12 entry holes. Nobody but me would know that, but it gave me renewed energy, I guess, and I started in again. And sometimes there are thin spots that now these projects over here, they're going to have thin spots no matter what. But you'll learn to use that red pen. Sometimes angles, like if you're using a straight blade, to get in there and turn and come out is tricky. So if you're really interested, I can show you. I've got a sample up here how you can sharpen up those corners. I got some cabinet grade plywood from a friend of Kurt's. Those, if you know somebody that's a cabinet maker, like for profession, sometimes they have scrap pieces of cherry and oak ply that's, makes great patterns and projects. You can use really cheap stuff for the back. It doesn't really matter. Super glue. I didn't bring one, but if you tilt your table 5 degrees depending if you go clockwise or counterclockwise, then the pattern, it's only going to come out one way. If it's a cutout pattern, again, I didn't bring one, but if you push it one direction, it'll pop out and it gives it kind of a two-dimensional look, and you can leave it that way and from the back glue it. I've only done a few of those, but it gives you, have you got that? Okay, Kurt's got a sample of
And
that.
it makes a difference which way you tilt that table. Because
Right.
I always tilt mine to the right. If you tilt it to the left, you're gonna have to reverse what that
Okay,
is.
so that's the directions for tilting it to the right. 20% table tilt, like sometimes I've done, well, like I've done a couple of projects where I had a live edge all the way around, which makes a really cool project, but I bought a couple of those from Kurt. But for this one, I just tilted 20 degrees, and there's no rhyme or reason to this. This eagle's the same way. It has a live edge on one side. The other side, I just kind of winged it. But the 20-degree tilt makes it better than if you just, looks better than if you just did a straight edge. Scrollsaw Woodworking Group is a great Facebook group that I've only been part of it for a few months, and I've learned a lot. There's Facebook groups there's one called, I think I'm part of a Beginning Woodworkers Facebook group, and that's kind of fun. I mean, some of them don't look that beginning of projects to me, but there's tons of great Facebook groups. If anyone's interested, I can, whether it be for the group or just for whoever's interested, I can demonstrate a spiral blade. This is not an exact science, so if you're not exactly on the line, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to know but you. This is a 5 because I have broken 24 blades on this project already. So this is a 5. These little slits right here, I've made with a number 2, so they'll show up. These up here, these were a number 1 spiral. When I did my first big eagle, I went back to the magazine article, and the guy that submitted the pattern, it had his contact information, and I sent him a picture, and I told him that I modified his pattern just a little bit to make it easier for me, and that I told him I love this pattern, I thanked him for sharing it, and he replied, he said, the only person that knows you modified the pattern is you and the wood.
Is there any point of cutting sections out of that so that you can remove the scrap?
Well, once you get one cut, you throw it away. I did this just so, because I have a timeline to get this project done. I wanted to have that.
Yeah, I'm saying though, like when you cut this pocket here out, would you ever cut across there so you can remove that piece?
Not necessarily. Sometimes if they're real fine, that might be, but not typically. They don't usually go anywhere because they're supported by the table. But it's almost, this kind of stuff is kind of fun. Sometimes I don't draw that on there. I just go. Who knows that that's not part of the pattern. Some of this, the tricky part is actually that the entry hole, because like if you're using, depending on the size blade you're using, 56. I thought I had them. Do I have my 56? I thought I had my drill bits with me. Yeah. This is the twist drills, number 56. These came from the wooden teddy bear, lots of places. So, like on these talons, if you put a entry hole right in the middle of some of these, it's going to show up. Now they have I've got 68s. Man, those suckers are little and they break. And, you know, that's where a drill press, putting it in a drill press, so you're not putting any extra torque, and you got to use that adapter, which all the catalogs sell those adapters, and because those 68s, you know, and they're not very long, they're going to just barely go through this, and but then it gets to be tricky depending on what size of blade you're going to, you know, I'm going to use a number 2 for these so that they show up. You could do those with a 2/0, and that would go through this hole easier. Or if you use the 68, that would make a tinier hole. But usually on a pattern, there's a place like the entry hole is right here where these two come together. So that's kind of a natural spot to be a little wider. Nobody knows. So there's usually a place like that. On this one, there really wasn't. So the entry hole is right there. You can see it's a little fatter there. And I use the 56. I don't use my 68s very much. This one right here, that's the entry hole. Now these, you can't tell the entry hole because I made it a little fatter. Now I'll come back, his mouth right here, I've gone around the edge of this. That's someplace I'll probably come back with a number 1. I probably used a 4, size 4 blade for this, but I'll come back with a number 1. That's what I did up here. And up here, when I was talking about the red pin, in the original pattern, I put no, and I tried to red it out. There's a little cut right there. This isn't real fine. I mean, if this was 1/4 or 1/8 inch, when I went like that, that would move, and that'd be a trouble spot. But it's 5/8 inch, so you got a lot more leeway. But that little cut right there, that sometimes when you make if I would cut that even with a number 1 or a 2/0, with a 2/0, it's not going to show up. You're going to have to use a number 1 or probably a number 1. That's what all this is, a number 1 spiral. If you cut that out, sometimes this little piece will break out, which I've had that happen before. You got to save that little piece, and then when you're completely done, before you put the finish on it, you use your super glue and glue it from the back. Even if your glue runs into these channels, nobody knows. I've got, not a lot, but I've got some pieces that I've super glued. So I just eliminated that. This is super easy, and makes, one of the trickiest things about this is gluing them on there. You can't just do them all at once. And some glues, you have to be careful what kind of glue you use because it'll like bleed into the wood or something. Sometimes I just use wood glue. Sometimes I use super glue. Sometimes I use hot glue guns, but not very often. I don't like the stringy mess. But this, you can make 2 of these. This is a super easy pattern. And if you want, like for this one like this, you don't need to do this little cut right here in the head. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do these little legs. I did. Actually, on Joseph, I didn't do that. On Mary, I did. But some of these, like these little legs, this gets, you're at risk to break this off right here if you do all that. But nobody's going to know. They know it's a lamb. They know the nativity scene, and they know it's a lamb. So
your mind fills it in. Yeah.
So there's no advantage, and especially if you're in a hurry, if you're going to make, I made probably a dozen of these, or maybe more. I was planning to take them on a mission trip to Ukraine, and then COVID hit, and I haven't been back since, and I was going to pack these up and give them to some of our interpreters as gifts. But we had caregivers for my in-laws. We had 6 caregivers, and Rhonda said, do you have a little trinket? We were going to give them a cash bonus, but she said, do you have any little trinkets? Well, I had a dozen of these downstairs, so we gave them all one of those. On my pattern, sometimes in my pattern I've got, if I've changed the size, I'll put how many % of the original it is. It's 80% of the original, or it's 120% of the original, and I'll put that in red on there so I don't accidentally use that one. And I hadn't done that, so I didn't know. So you have to be willing to make mistakes and then throw it away. But that's a real fun one. These are fun. These are super easy. Steve Good's got some. He's got an amazing number of patterns. Some of them are very simple, but some of them are more intricate. But this is a real. These are real fun. These are fun. I'm gonna make some more of these. I like to have stuff like that around. We also, the nativity, the little nativity down there with the different kinds of hardwood, I keep those on hand, and we take them if a friend's getting married or a niece or something, we give them one as a wedding gift along with a check. I mean, we don't just give them that, but it makes a fun gift or something like that. People in our area do a lot of fundraisers for people that have a lot of medical bills, and they'll stop in my office, like if I could donate something to the silent auction. Well, I'm not going to give them a coupon for a free teeth cleaning, but sometimes I've got a wall in one of the hallways that we don't use much. I've got a wall, and Dave was stopped by the office the other day. I've all these different projects. Some of these came off that wall. I made them one time. I have no purpose for them. I'll probably give them away or sell them someday, and I'll just take something off of the wall and give it to them and say, you could put this in your auction. Or I go home and get them a nativity scene, because I've always got some of those. But I was going to show you for sharp turns. This I used, this 1/2-inch cherry. Everywhere where I have an arrow, if you look close, you'll see that there's an angle that's less than 90 degrees. And what I've done is I've cut in, if the angle goes like that, I've cut into the angle from one side, and then I'll back the blade up and I'll cut the corner, and I'll go up and I'll go on, and then I come back and I've got these little places, and I'll come from the other direction. I'll just put my blade up against this and I'll go straight down and I'll nick those out, and it'll be a perfect sharp. You know, if you're really good, you can get in there and make that turn and come back out. And I sometimes will do that, but on this I purposely didn't on a whole bunch of them. Now, some of these, you know, I went in and turned around, came back out, and nobody would know the difference, that it's not as, some of these aren't going to be as sharp as these ones I did this way, but nobody would ever know that. But, so I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, I guess, because of my job. But anyway, that's a way to sharpen up angles. But it's just practice. I use a combination of spiral and straight blades because there are certain things that lend itself perfectly to spiral blades, and there are other things that it's kind of a toss-up. I've learned, like a blade of grass, the wild horses, they're running across the field of grass, and the blades of grass go, and clumps of grass go at all different little shapes, and it's kind of hard to get them sharp with a spiral blade. You go up and back, and when it's all said and done, nobody knows the difference, but a straight blade works better. But so I use a combination.
What is a lifter block?
They make, and I can't do it very effectively here because my light's not cooperating, but you want to hold that up. When, to put a piece like this in where you got a thread, the guy that I bought some of these nativities from, I showed him on my phone some pictures of stuff like this, and he said, that would drive me nuts. Threading it in and out, you know, because all the entry holes. And I was thinking to myself, I don't want to go to a craft show and have 600 pieces, you know. And he would skip threading his. I bought some stuff from him where if he cut through something to get to the next area to cut out, and probably nobody knows it but me, that if he would have drilled an entry hole and threaded through there, that would have been the part of the stable would have been solid. The lifter, when I want to go to the next one, you know, this head will lift up, and that's my lifter. You can buy, it would go, now this dust collector that I have, it works pretty effectively. I don't have it quite as close, but it's sucking the dust at the bottom too. And I mean, we haven't cut much, but there's no sawdust. And spiral blades make a lot of sawdust compared to a straight blade. But so they make a rod, just a piece of metal and a couple of screws basically, and then you like replace this screw or something, and you can click that in and it raises it up, because the next thing here is to move somewhere, or I'm gonna go up here, and I'm gonna later today or tomorrow I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna cut out. Now I've already cut this one out, but I'm gonna cut that out. I haven't cut, well, I started to cut this one and I left it. So it's just easier to get it out of the way, to tip your wood up to put it in there if you have that blade out of the way. And tell you the truth, I've been using this about a month. I was looking at the Scrollsaw group, and they were talking about, where did you get your lifter arm and all this stuff? And I'm like,
1x4 seems thought
so it's like, and then I use a pair of pliers, sometimes these, not so much a straight blade, but the spiral blade. If your hole is pretty small, these are really grabby. Even if you've got them, you got to have the blades. It's going to be cut. You got to have the saw blade in there the right direction, not upside down, and they're really grabby. So you start to put it in there, and it can get really tight. And so sometimes I'll just grab hold of it, and while I drop that down, because what happens, you'll start to go halfway down, and it crimps underneath there, and if it didn't break there, in just about a minute, your blade's going to break. So, and the other thing that I do, and that comes, if you're doing fret, like Kurt's, what he's doing, fine fret work, sometimes it comes in handy. You'll get little pieces, and you can't get them out, and so my tweezers, I've got my little piece of wire taped on there. They come in handy to pull stuff out, and then you don't have to, poke it and grab it. I can grab it and pick it out, and then I've got a scrap box. It doesn't all hit the scrap box, but I've got a scrap box for the wood pile down below.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.